Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards on the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at City. This is a 5-cost action card from Prosperity, and it says +1 card, +2 actions. If there are 1 or more empty supply piles, +1 card. If there are 2 or more, +1 buy, and +1 coin. Now before we talk about this card, I'm just going to lay down some definitions. So City gets more powerful as supply piles empty and gives you additional bonuses, and these are like cumulative as more piles empty. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be talking about City in each of its 3 different states as being a level 1, level 2 or level 3 city, with level 1 being no piles empty and 3 being when 2 or more piles are empty. So, City, it exists in these 3 states. At a level 1 city, it's basically just an expensive village. It costs 5, and village on its own costs 3, so this is not great. You don't really want to be spending huge amounts of money on what is normally a 3-cost card. Of course, it might get better in the future. And at level 2, it draws you 1 extra card. So now it's like a laboratory and a village combined. Now, this is an effect that we tend to call a lost city because of a card in Adventures, which is +2 cards, +2 actions, and costs 5 with an on-gain penalty. So getting this for 5 without the on-gain penalty is pretty good. A level 2 city is perfectly good 5-cost card, pretty decent, I think. And a level 3 city also gives you +1 buy and +1 coin, and so it's like a village and a laboratory and a market all at once. And this is incredibly strong for 5. Like, that's a lot of value that you get. The level 3 city is pretty nuts in terms of the sheer amount of bonuses that it's giving you, and very, very good bonuses as well on top of that. So, how strong is City going to be in a game? Well, City's power level, it varies wildly based on how many supply piles are going to empty. Right? There's a stark contrast between a level 1 city and a level 3. So it's really important that you try and gauge how strong they're likely to become, because that's definitely going to shift your perception on, how valuable the city is going to be this game. This is very dependent, of course, on the rest of the kingdom. You need to figure out if any supply piles are going to empty and when, how quickly are they going to empty. If a city is expected to become a strong card, then it is worth bearing in mind that the city pile itself is a strong candidate for being one of the supply piles that are actually going to empty. So there's a range of things that we look for that make supply piles more likely to empty and therefore make City more likely to be stronger. And here's just a couple of examples of those. So number 1, access to gainers like Workshop or Artisan. Of course, if it's easier to just gain cards off the pile, it's a lot quicker to empty them. Junking attacks like Witch, these are a big deal. When there's something like Witch, particularly a strong junking attack in that particular case, highly likely the curse pile's just going to run out at some point. And usually fairly early on as well-ish, so, that's a big deal for City. Easy access to plus buy. Obviously, if you can only buy 1 card per turn, that just slows down the number of piles going to empty. Strong engines. Generally strong engines because, A, they have the chance to gain more cards per turn than a more money strategy, but also they tend to prioritise action piles over the base treasure piles, and the base treasure piles of copper, silver, gold are very, very big piles that are just basically very, very hard to empty. And last but not least, more players as well. You're more likely to get piles to run out, sometimes quite quickly in like 4-player games. For example, so City can actually just be pretty strong if you've got like 4-player game, just because people going for just some normal kingdom card, like, the pile just runs out very quickly because you don't get that many per player. Now, sometimes kingdoms are not very good for engines, but it might be the case that, City, when you think about it, it's kind of like an engine card all on its own, right? It's giving you actions, it's giving you draw, it's giving you buys, it's giving you coins, if it was the high level. And it might be that, as long as City gets to be a level 3 city, or even just a level 2 city, because it's your only draw, that actually you now get to do something a little bit more interesting with the engine. Like, it actually becomes viable to actually draw cards and do things. Now, if this is the case and you're wholly reliant on City in order for this to happen, then it might be the case that not building an engine and not helping to empty piles will actually be better. It turns out it takes a long time for one player to empty piles on their own sometimes, especially with the case of like the city pile. Your opponent might be thinking, wow, if I could get 10 cities, then they power up and it's like having 10 laboratories, and now I've really got an engine and I can draw my deck and play all these cards every turn. But as long as you're not contributing towards lowering that pile, one person buying like 10 cities on their own takes a very, very long time, right? It could take them 10 turns, and then they're not going to start buying them straight away at the start of the game, so the game's almost over at that point. City, you do sort of have to consider that there's got to be an engine. Like, there's got to be various components available, not counting City as well sometimes, because City on its own sort of isn't enough to actually kick off an engine a lot of the time, if it's reliant on solely itself, because you can just, it's too much for one player to empty piles on their own sometimes. So City offers the chance to get much stronger later on in the game. So this presents a challenge of timing. When do you actually gain cities, right? When are you going to go and buy them? So as we all know, level 3 City in particular is a very strong card, but level 2 is pretty good as well. So it can feel, based on that you want to prioritise the City, and you might want to win the split and say, this seems like it's going to be the most important card. But as a general rule in Dominion, because it's a fast game that tends to snowball, you usually want things that give you benefits now rather than later. So it's sort of like when you think about something like a duration card, duration cards usually, something that gives you like an effect next turn is going to be worse than the same card that just gives you the effect now. And this is the case with City, sure, City can be a laboratory and village combo later, but for now it's just a village, right? And so if you could instead be drawing your deck now, you might find that that's better, even if the draw card you buy now is terminal, right? Clearly, maybe later on, City's going to be a more appealing card when it's boosted, but if you just need the draw now, rather than later, then you shouldn't really wait on the cities boosting. For me, the most important thing, I think, with City is to not lose sight of the fact that it's primarily a cantrip village, so the +1 card, like a drawing village. You should be buying villages at certain times, so right at the start of the game, if you don't have enough action cards to spend those +2 actions, then buying the village doesn't really do anything. There's a large reason why when regular village costs 3, the vast majority of the time you're not opening with it, right? Because the +1 card, +1 action on its own doesn't do anything. All it's sort of doing is giving you that +1 action for free, and if you're not spending it, that's not that different from just buying nothing. So if you really need draw now, buy the draw now. Right, you don't buy village when you really want to be drawing more cards. Don't wait until later. So you want to make sure, I think, with City, the fact that it's a village really is key. Maybe when the pile starts to get really low, you might consider jumping towards City, but first and foremost, you start adding cities to your deck when you really start needing villages to be added to your deck. The thing is that because it might get more powerful later on, this isn't a nothing consideration. What it lets you do with City in particular compared to other villages is that it lets you prioritize buying draw a little bit less. So what you can do is that instead of getting to the stage where you're consistently drawing your full deck every turn, you might think to yourself, well, you've got 3 cities, and eventually they'll be drawing me an extra 3 cards in total. So maybe it's fine for now if 2 or 3 cards in my deck I'm just not going to see every turn. I'm just not going to reach them, because you know that if you add more draw right now, eventually you'll just have too much overdraw. You'll be drawing too many cards and not actually making use of it. So what you can do instead is you can just start focusing on buying your payload now. So if, for example, you needed villages because you're hoping to like play a lot of bridges or something like that, you can just start buying the bridges now, and then you might want some draw, but it's okay if you don't play them all now, because getting those powerful effects like a bridge earlier on will help you build your deck more, and at some point your cities are likely to kick on, and then you'll be drawing everything anyway. So you might as well start getting the benefits of your building the engine a little bit earlier, and just wait for that last little bit to come online. So you sort of you can get away with sacrificing a little bit of your deck control in the short term in order to basically get a bit of a head start on your engine's final state, if that makes sense. That's just one of the things that City does because of how it starts giving you those like extra draws later on in the game. Now, level 3 cities in particular, it is worth noting, are very, very powerful cards. When you power up from a level 2 to level 3 city, you're effectively adding a bunch of what we call payload to your deck, a little bit of money and a bunch of extra buys. Buys and money suddenly getting thrown into your deck is actually very important because this provides a lot of what we call pile control. So when you just suddenly have a lot of money and a lot of buys, you get a lot of control over when to empty piles. And of course, once you at the state where you've got a level 3 city, that means 2 piles are already empty. So suddenly getting a load of buys and coins in that scenario makes it very, very easy to empty one more pile, and that actually triggers the end of the game. So the end of the game is coming very fast. Normally, if a city hits level 3, you can expect the game to end at any time. Estate pileouts are a pretty serious threat. That's an easy pile to use a ton of buys on, basically because the estates are so cheap, and particularly in 2-player, it's just a slightly smaller pile, and it earns you points as well when you gain it. So bear in mind that if your game ever gets to the state where level 3 cities are looking likely, you really got to take note of the fact that the estate pile, or any other pile really, but particularly like the estates, might just vanish suddenly at one point, as soon as the cities kick on normally. So because cities threaten this massive boost to deck quality anytime they power up, it's really important to consider when this is going to happen. Especially for level 3 cities, because as soon as they come on, as I just said, the game can suddenly end. So it's really, really important to think, when is this going to happen? Whenever it's possible, and it's not always possible, but when it can, really you want to be the one who gets to play with higher level cities first, rather than your opponent, because it's such a nice big boost. Getting a really good turn before your opponent does can be very important in Dominion because of how fast and snowbally the game can be sometimes. You want to be the one getting the big turns off first. Now, in a default state, the only way that you're gaining cards into your deck is by buying them during the buy phase. And this is a bit of a problem for City because once you're in your buy phase, you're not playing action cards anymore. That means that if you empty a pile in your buy phase, you don't get to play with the cities until everyone else who is playing has had a chance to play with them first. Especially if you think a 4-player game, you got 3 opponents, and that's 3 other people getting to use big power cities before you get a chance. That's pretty bad. This is especially important for level 3 cities in particular, because you just simply might not get another turn at all if you let every other player play with these cities that are giving them buys and coins before you get a chance, right? They might just all buy out the estates and then, oops, you never got a chance to even play with yours. So generally, if it's possible, trying to gain action cards during the action phase, well, any card really, emptying piles during the action phase is a lot more preferable. There are other things you can do as well. So for example, if you play an outpost and immediately get another turn first, then that's good because that means you get first turn with City. But generally, it's a lot more common that when you're looking to power up cities, you're going to be using gainers like workshops, for example, or you might trash cards from the supply with Lurker, right? There's a bunch of ways to do it. But generally, gaining cards during the action phase to empty a pile is the ideal way to power up a city. And that's because if you could do it mid-turn in your action phase, you now have a chance to play your cities in their powered up state straight away. It's important to note, though, that with City itself, because it costs 5, it's a lot harder to empty 5-cost piles during your action phase. There's just way less 5-cost gainers than there are like workshop variants. So, sometimes City's a high priority pile, and you just can't do this gaining of cities in your action phase because there's no artisan in the game, so you just can't do it. Now, because it's usually impossible to empty certain piles during the action phase, particularly the city pile, this can sort of end up in a situation where basically nobody wants to empty the pile anymore. If you imagine that you have level 2 cities, for example, one of the supply piles are empty, and there's 1 city left in the supply pile, you know that if you take that city, your opponent's going to get level 3 cities to play with on their turn. And they might just end the game on you in that case. Let's pretend in this situation that they will. So you shouldn't buy the city in that case. Just leave it in its pile, because if your opponent gets it, they win. And what can happen in this case is that, you end up with these piles where only 9 cards have been taken and no one dares to take the last one. And, in a 2-player game, that means that there aren't an equal number of those cards out between players. So it can be important to try and focus a little bit more on at least getting the first 5 or to 5 copies and so-called win that split. There's only now 9 cards in that split, so you just want to get more. And then, because your opponent, how can I put this? Let's say, for example, that you have the city pile and you've got 5 of them and your opponent has 4. And normally they would buy the last city and win that split because it's the only village pile or something and it's important. Well, if they do that, then they are giving you the laboratory or the market cities, first. So they just won't buy it. And in that case now you have the village advantage over your opponent. Right, so if you can get to the state where you're gaining, or you own more of these cards first, you can sort of take the most advantage of the fact that you're now got more of that resource. So you could just start taking advantage of the fact you've got more villages and will by just getting more terminal payload, and then just trying to use that terminal payload to win from there. And your opponent knows that if they try and catch up by buying the last village, then you just shoot ahead very suddenly. So it's really important with City, especially in this case where the only way to power them up is to give the bonus to your opponent first, that you try and get in on some of these key splits so that you get that definite advantage over them. Now, in a rare case with City, and you need certain cards to do this, it's actually possible to return cards to supply piles. And in this particular case, what you can do is you can actually repopulate what was an empty supply pile and make it not empty anymore. Well, cities only check at the time that you play them, so it's entirely possible to effectively power down cities in this case and actually remove bonuses from them. Now, in all of these cases, this is going to involve you effectively losing a card because you've got to put a card back into the supply. However, it might be worth it if the reduction in bonuses that your opponent gets is harsher than you basically losing this card. Of course, it's important to note that in this case, the opposite applies to emptying a pile mid-action phase. You should try and play all your cities first before you do this and return a card so that you get to take advantage of the bonus and then your opponent doesn't. So here are some examples of cards that can enable this. Encampment is sort of a particularly notable exception because when you go to put encampment back on the pile, it doesn't happen until the start of cleanup phase. So that means that it doesn't matter when you choose to say, I've lost this encampment, I'm not going to reveal a gold or a plunder and put it back. Your cities will stay powered up effectively until the end of your turn, and then they go back down. But otherwise, experiment is a pile that empties and repopulates all the time. In the case of experiment, as soon as you play an experiment, the supply pile is repopulated, so you really got to try and find your cities first in that case. Ambassador, this is, I know it's a removed card now, but this is probably most likely going to happen with something like Curse, because the problem is that it has to be a 2-player game, and you have to actually put 2 copies back, because 1 copy then goes straight to your opponent. But in like a junking game, you could absolutely repopulate the Curse pile temporarily, right? With something like Ambassador and wind the cities back down. Wave the Horse lets you return literally any card to a supply pile, so it's very powerful in that regard, but of course you do lose the cards. And Wave the Butterfly, being that it's a terminal, it lets you swap a card for another, basically, that's more expensive. That's something that you might more reasonable wait to the end of your turn, whereas like Way of the Horse is something that you might do mid-turn in order to keep your turn going. But these are not important, they don't come up that often, but it is worth noting that you can drop the power level of City with these. So in summary, City, I think this is an above average card. It's not super powerful, even though level 3 cities are pretty strong, but generally I think it's quite good. City is a card that you really got to pay attention to, the fact that it's there. I'd say that City is primarily a village, but it has got that potential to be powerful draw and even a payload as well. It's very, very important when City is around to start thinking piles all the time. You got to watch out for situations where it's possible to empty piles, and watch out for times when someone might be looking to do so. You can lose games very quickly and suddenly by basically not paying attention to piles when City is out. I've done it a lot. If you're learning the game, you're going to do it a lot as well. City will catch you out until you learn about it. Like, you've really got to pay attention to piles when City is around. That's just what this card does. But it's important, despite how strong it looks at level 3, that you don't prioritise it too early at the expense of getting a better deck now. It is too slow to just buy useless cantrip villages over and over again early in the game in the hope that they start becoming laboratories later on, right? Like, you got to start building the deck and getting it under control now, and you do what you can, and then, the cities you get to see a little bit later, like, okay, is it actually worth getting them now? Usually you are picking them up a little bit before they turn on, but not so early. It's just not worth it. Only buy it if you need the village in that case. Right, so that's all I have to say about City. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head over to the online client, and we're going to force City into some kingdoms, and we're going to see how impactful it is. Now, in the last one of these videos, of course, these second editions came out, and I tried to hide the new cards, but at this point there's so many new cards that I can't do it anymore, so we are just going to play with the second edition of Seaside and Prosperity in the mix. That might mean that some cards come up that I haven't really properly assessed yet, but, well, we'll do the best that we can. So, let's see what we've got here. So there is one new card here, Anvil. There is no Platinum Colony in this kingdom. So what do we have? Well, we've got the village with City. It's the only one. We have alternate draw with like Rabble and Council Room. So the other draw is Terminal, and we've got the one village. In terms of like payload, there's Vassal, there's Courtier, which can gain us like golds. There's Merchant Ship. And of course there's like City itself. Now there is Anvil to gain. Well, what are you going to gain with Anvil? Vassals and Harbingers you can gain. Like, Vassals are fine, but, you're going to be using some of this village space on your terminal draw. The thing is that there's no trashing. So, having Vassal in a deck with no trashing, and there's nothing that, like, sets up Vassal to be easier to work, I guess, in fact, at the start of your turn, Vassal is more likely to miss because there's Rabble and there's no trashing. But there is like Vineyard as the plan later on to like try and take advantage of an engine. But how good is the engine really? Well, let's say we just leave City to one player to try and build an engine with. I think it's going to take them a long time to empty a pile. Yeah, there's like Anvil, and maybe they can like buy a bunch of Anvils, and they can try and buy like Harbingers and Vassals. Oh, I guess you can top deck cards with Harbinger, can't you, to set up a Vassal? That is true, actually. Rabble does discard actions, and you may be able to top deck things and then hit them with Vassal. So I guess a vassal engine is actually a little bit better than I thought. So I was thinking that like this might be the case where you just ignore the city and you do like council room big money or something, or like merchant ship money, which I know sounds terrible. And you just sort of let the engine player squander for a long time. But, Vineyard is a threat, and with Anvil, you can get a bunch of cheap 3 costs here. And they could even get an herbalist for buy, but that sounds terrible, actually. I'd rather get buys from cities or council rooms. And then later on, they can anvil some potions, and you get extra buys with city, and they can just buy a lot. So I think the engine, at least in a 2-player game, is like still worth building here. Maybe even like a 3-player game as well. So I guess that's what I do, and for that reason I do want city. The problem is there's a lot of expensive cards that we want. We want a lot of 5s. We want cities. We want rabbles. We want council rooms. We want vassals, but we also want a little bit of village support for the vassals too. I don't think we want too many vassals though, right? Because eventually like the cities draw, and then it's just really easy to draw the deck. I think Vineyards push us over the edge, but it's not a great deck, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. This seems tough to build. If you go for the engine, what would you open? Anvil and a vassal? And that's probably good enough to hit 5. I mean, Anvil sort of is like buying a workshop, right? But it's non-terminal in that regard, which is why it's fine to open vassal with it. It doesn't help you hit 5. It actually goes against you. But I can't see myself opening like double vassal. That doesn't sound great. And I'm not really sure what the build order would be in that case. It just feels like it's too hard to get going. You can empty like the vassals pretty easy. But that's not a great deck, and it's just hard to hit city otherwise. This one's very tough. I'm struggling to assess how good the engine actually is in this case, because you're kind of reliant on city with it, right? What are the alternatives? Like, is Courtier that good? Rabble and Merchantship are the only things that let it get like more than 1 bonus. I like Money Merchantship. Is that actually good? Like, surely not, right? But, I could see it. I'm just worried that too many vassals in this deck are going to be unplayable. And you're gaining them for the Vineyard points. But, you keep dudding all the time is the problem, right? And, eventually it's still hard. You add anvils to your deck. It's so hard to actually draw your deck. And if you go Council Room, you just make the money player buy provinces really easily. Maybe you just can't build a good Vineyard engine, but you have got, Harbingers to just throw into your deck constantly if the game gets dragged out, and the Vineyard player really benefits from that quite a lot. I feel like Vineyard pushes this that it kind of has to just be the engine, but... So for that reason, I think you go City. I think City's a high priority because you're throwing so many vassals into your deck early on. You actually don't get that much draw. And you're sort of just getting a density of cities and vassals. Is that really right? I think you have to go Rabble instead of Council Room just to muck up your opponent as much as possible. And Council Room is too enabling of the money strategy because the engine's not super competitive here. So it's a bit borderline, I think. That's what I'm going to say. I think that's what I'm going to go with in the end. City is the only village is actually very important here, and you're really happy when it boosts in power level, but the engine's super inconsistent, and you're just trying to throw a load of action cards into your deck, and with the exception of Anvil and Vineyard, you're never buying anything that's not an action card. I think, and I guess you get provinces and duchies later on or something. But yeah, there's no treasures except Anvil, I guess. Well, that's what I'm going to go with. So I think City works here. I think City being the only village is actually a really important card. I'd be very happy to win the City split here. And the boost later on, if it gets to level 3, could let you buy a lot of vineyards because you really want the plus buys from vineyards there. They don't cost money. So this is another game where we do not have Colony Platinum. There is, as you notice, Charlatan, so Curse is now a treasure. And there's Monkey as well, which is a draw card. So for villages, we've got City, Native Village, and King's Court. So there's a lot of other villages already. Is there any plus buy on this kingdom? There is only level 3 City. And are there any gainers? There's only Horde. Oh, there's Smugglers. There's Smugglers. But the problem is that there's no trashing in this Charlatan, right? So, again, the engine is like this vassal stuff, but there's no trashing, and that's just nasty. I mean, it's a lot harder to get vassals this time because there's no, like, anvil. Instead, there's Smugglers. And what that makes me think is that I want a gun for Charlatan, and then it's just, like, hordes and treasuries, he says. Like, maybe Monkey's quite nice as well as another terminal in that case. Like, if my opponent's getting hordes, they might be gaining multiple cards when they wouldn't, and Monkey's a little bit better. And it's just nice and cheap early on. But, like, I don't like the feel of King's Court here. Now, to be fair, there's a junking attack. That means that a pile is likely to empty. So City is likely to also become a laboratory, and that makes it easy to draw. But the problem is what are you doing with that draw, right? Because you can't buy things. Like, there's only, like, King's Courting a Smugglers in the hope that you gain something, but if your opponent's just trying to buy, like, provinces with Horde in play, the only thing you're going to smuggle is golds, which you really don't want to do. So I think the engine's going to struggle to get to a level 3 City, which is critical as it's the only plus buy. And for that reason, the engine's not very good. In addition to that, Charlatan gives 3 coins, which is very good for spiking to 8. And the curses that you're junked with can still be played for money. So I think the money deck actually is fine here. I think this is Charlatan and Horde, and maybe, like, Monkey, and maybe Treasuries, and, like, Warehouse is probably fine as well, but you're basically going for a money deck, and we're just not buying any villages, I think. And so I think that City doesn't work here, because this isn't a true engine, and it's just too hard to get City to be level 3 to make the engine work. So, City can't do the engine stuff on its own, which is sort of what you'd have to do here. That's what I think, anyway. So, and then, if you go the money route, you prevent an engine player from being able to do stuff good with Smugglers as well, which, like, hits the engine more. So I think it's too easy to hose the engine, basically, so we're not going to do the engine. And City is just... I think it's wrong to buy City there. I think that's the case where, like, someone tries to build the engine on their own, like, you don't help them out, and it doesn't work out for them. So no Colony Platinum again. We have Philosopher's Stone and Possession. That's why we've got Potion. Oh, let's see. So we've got Village and City as villages. There are draw cards with Torturer and Witch, so there's very good draw available. Torturer being available means that it sounds like Curses might empty. Well, there's Witch as well, sorry. With Witch, Curses is definitely going to empty. So Cities can be a bit of draw as well, so that's nice. Again, there's no trashing. No, false. There's Forge, so we can trash. Okay, that's good. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that there is plus buy, there's Astrolabe. Okay, so we've got a good engine, and then there's Possession as well. Oh man. There's, like, Pirate. So, like, what's the alternative? Witch and Pirate money board to an engine? That doesn't sound great to me. I think the engine is just too good. Like, the engine can use Pirates to boost up towards the end if it has to, but it's also got, like, Possession as well. And Possession can mean that a money deck doesn't get to take advantage of Pirate because the Possession player takes all the treasures that it gains. That's interesting. If you're being possessed in Pirate, I guess it doesn't gain the treasure to your hand, does it? Because it goes to the possessing player. Yeah, so I think we can build the engine here, but how do we build it? Because every card is very expensive, and it's actually quite hard to get Forge and draw the deck at the same time. But I think we've got long enough to actually do it. That's sort of what I'm hoping on. Or is a pirate money thing going to be good enough to actually get going before the engine gets into play? Because the problem is you've got to get up to Forge. But we want to stop on the way to be like playing witches, and that's no good for Forge. So what do? We open double silver, and we're trying to get to like witches, which I think witch is going to be better than torture here, at least early on. And then if we can Forge, we can start buying cities. But then what's the next pile that's going to empty? You see, I don't think cities are going to turn payload. They're just going to be draw. And if you go down that route, what you really want to be doing is buying and playing lots of possessions. But I do wonder if that's too slow. But getting junked a lot with a witch sort of sounds bad for a money board. But like, man, you money boards like pirate, I think. This is a case where I haven't played enough with this card to understand. It doesn't seem great in an engine, but I think it's actually pretty good for money, is what I'm thinking. Because the treasure goes to your hand, right? It's easy to spike up to 8. And you are at risk here of someone just grabbing enough provinces to eat up all the points, right? Because it's not a colony game. I don't know, man. The engine just feels too slow. Like, the cards are so expensive, right? You want the Forge. You want a bunch of possessions. I mean, a pirate lets you get a potion when you need it or whatever, but I don't know, right? Like, getting control is too long because the witch gets in the way, right? And then it's too slow to Forge down. So what else do you do? I mean, you're not going to just eat a lot of junk and go Philosopher's Stone with Pirate, are you? It can't gain the Philosopher's Stone, but it can get you a potion when you need it. Is this the Philosopher's Stone deck? Have we done it? Have we found it? Surely not. But you could buy a Bureaucrat in that case, which is also terrible. But, like, you could do it, right? You could have Pirate and the action that you play is Bureaucrat, and you're just basically trying so hard to stop the engine player hitting 7, and then if they curse you a bunch, you just start going Philosopher's Stone with Pirate support. That might actually work. We might have done it. We may have found the Philosopher's Stone deck here. But it just I really don't know. But if you're not getting witched by your opponent, like, how good is the engine then? Because it sure feels a lot better. And it sure feels like if you're opening double silver, it shouldn't be that hard to hit Forge. The problem is drawing up enough to get a good Forge off, right? That's the big kicker. And it doesn't really like trashing the estates unless you can draw all of them together. Like, I almost feel like the draw isn't good enough for Forge, is the problem, right? I don't know. Maybe I just try the money thing. So this is where, like, you know, I don't know how good Pyro and Astrolabe are for money, really. So I'm struggling to assess how good this is. I think this might not be an engine board in the end. Maybe both players buy Witch anyway, and then someone shifts into, like, Pirate and Philosopher's Stone. Like, maybe Bureaucrat's a mistake to open with, like, because it sure sounds bad. Bureaucrat Philosopher's Stone does not sound very good, if I'm honest. But in the face of, like, something. But see, if they possess you, like, your deck is still bad, but they get to buy provinces with it, I suppose. And they get treasures as well from your pirates, right? Which is actually not bad for them. And they can start getting Astrolabes. Maybe you just get hosed long term by the engine. I think that's a toss up, but I don't know, I guess is the answer. For some reason I was considering Philosopher's Stone, but that's got to be bad, right? Like, But, like, that's City is decent for the engine on that board anyway. Anyway, so we've moved on. No Platinum Colony again. Never seem to get that these days, it seems. Does it still work? Let's see. So we have no trashing again, and we've got a junker with familiar. And blockade as well can be a junker. So familiar sure sounds good in that case, right? I said there's no trashing. There's island, which is only okay. I think city's nice here, is it? So let's see. So we want to get the familiar out early, right? We can't blockade familiar because you can't gain it with blockade. So I think you open potion silver, or in the case of a 5-2, you open potion nothing and you're sad. Maybe do you get the lurker? I'm not sure you get the lurker straight away. Even on a 5-2, I don't like a lurker immediately. Actually, maybe you can, because you don't think your opponent's going to get one, right? But that sure makes it hard to hit 4-3, so no, I don't like it straight away. The lurkers help us get nobles, and they help us get islands, so that's quite nice. There are gainers there, and there is bridge, so there is payload for an engine. It's just your only thinning has to be like island when you're being walloped with curses from familiar. There is like secret passage to try and push through. If we go blockade, what are we gaining with it? Islands, secret passages, bridges. They all feel like they'll eventually be nice, but the problem is there's only one village pile, and that's city. I sure would like to mostly play bridges, but that means that instead I have to use my draw for like laboratories instead of playing like nobles. But that's okay, like Lurker can gain cities and laboratories. Lurker can trash piles, cards from the supply as well that can boost city. And, powered up cities with bridges certainly sounds all right, I think you do go for the engine here. You're going to power up cities early on with familiar. That's going to drain curses very quickly. City's just a lot better than laboratory. I guess you can try Lurker stuff. Maybe, if it works out, but I'm not going to prioritise it straight away. The thing with bridge is that you get to blockade 5-cost cards as well. Actually, that is quite nice. Right, but the curses will run out before it matters. You do get to gain laboratories and stuff, so I think the engine is worth pursuing here. You can't big money in the face of familiar, and there's no good money enablers anyway, so I think you do it, and city clearly seems like a very, very good card here. Being the only village on a bridge board, with an engine, well, that's clearly very strong. I'm very happy. Oh, it's not the only village, sorry, because there's nobles. But nobles is a stop card village, and it's very expensive. And the trashing is not great, being only island, and there's stuff like Lurker and Bridge are stop cards. So I think the game's going to 3-pile with cities instead. You buy familiar, you get curses, you get islands, you're already at level 3 cities. The game's nearly over. You're not really going to bridge make a turn. You're going to get some, but the game's never going to last long enough. I think city's going to be very powerful on this board. That's the way I'm calling it. You build the engine, it stalls around for a while, and then all of a sudden someone kicks off, and no other strategy is really going to work. You just sort of got to hope that you get familiar early and you don't whiff on it. I think that's just what happens here. So I think city's very good on this board. That's what I'm thinking. I prefer it over nobles as a village, but the nobles are points, and I've got Lurker to get them later on. Right, so this is the last one. No Platinum Colony again. More new cards as well. So we've got Charlatan again. So we have normal village and we have city as villages. The only trashing is replace, which is okay. But we have got Charlatan cursing us. What can we turn curses into with replace? Herbalist, estate. Those aren't great. The only other draw, although the only draw at all is city. There is Crystal Ball to trash, actually, to be fair. Now, hang on. We do have that. And there is Swindler, which is pretty nasty. Actually, how nasty is it here? Oh, there is a potion, so even Militia's not safe, right? Militia can be turned into a potion, but then there's Possession. Now, there is Collection, which is very good. The thing here is that if we manage to kick off cities, that's very good with collection, right? There's a cheap pile, like even Herbalist, we don't want to care about. Like, we can score a lot of points very quickly. You buy a load of villages or whatever. There are those cheap cards available. I do want to curse here. I do want to hit Charlatan quickly, and I want to stop my opponent from getting it. So I think I open Militia, and honestly, it's probably silver. I'm getting a Charlatan first. I might prioritise trashing with Crystal Ball. Replace sure sounds nice to get some villages, though, and it could do some extra cursing, but I think Charlatan's good enough. I think Crystal Ball, I don't know how good for a trasher Crystal Ball is here, but it sure will get rid of those curses occasionally, and like occasionally the estates. It's a little bit better than nothing, and Charlatan being around means that City will become a draw at some point, right? Like, the pile's definitely going to empty. You could even open like Militia Swindler and try and get more curses out early on that way, possibly. But the curses aren't so bad when Swindler turns the coppers into curses, because they still play them for 1 coin each. So Swindler doesn't sound all that high priority here, to be honest. I don't think it's actually doing that much damage early on. In fact, I'm not sure it does that much damage ever. You'd sort of like to hit cities, though. So I think I try and play this. I try and curse my opponent. I try and militia them. I try and get thin. And then you sort of want to do city and collection. You mainly want city just for the draw. The fact that it's a village doesn't matter that much, but for sure I might get the chance to, like, possess my opponent, maybe. The only thing is that you can't really play collection. Collection is like a prevention against being possessed, right? Because you can't buy action cards when possessing someone, or they get a load of points. So, And you don't really want to put replace in your deck if someone's going to possess you as well, right? Like, that's the other spooky bit. So I think city is important here. I think you still try and build the engine anyway. You've got time. There is Charlatan, and there's stuff like collection as payload for the engine, so you don't have to buy victory cards at all, right? And there are reasonable targets for collection to buy as well, because there are a bunch of cheap cards that are going to be around. So I think that's what we do. I think we build the engine, and I think city is very important, and I'm very happy to win the split. But I've got to get the Charlatans first, and I'm probably getting a Crystal Ball first as well. I don't know how many Crystal Balls I might want. This seems tough. Is there a worry that someone just grabs a load of collections and tries to gain enough points to put you in a situation before pile's empty? I don't think so. Because you sure can buy estates and empty those with collections, right? They give you 2 coins and a buy. I'm not sure how good that is. I sure would prefer to build an engine here. That's got to be right, you know. And possession can backfire on you if you're not building the engine, I guess. Yeah, okay, so I think city's very good. So, all in all, city seemed pretty good all round. There was some non-engine boards, and some of these are very tricky. But, you know, this one in particular, I guess, you know, how much are you using the actions? Sometimes we wanted city for draw, but there were also the engines where city really wanted to be level 3, but it couldn't reasonably, and then that meant that the engine wasn't viable. So, yeah, as you see, this took a while, this kingdom analysis. City can be hard. So the thing to note here, I guess, these random kingdom analyses, they're not playing these boards. They're just trying to provide context for what sort of scenarios this card is good. And, there's only so much I can do without actually playing the kingdom. Games change as they go on. Sometimes things reprioritize based on your draws. It's only a guess, and this is a card that's very hard to guess early on, so it's a little bit vague, but hopefully it started to give you some ideas. And I think that's really it for City. So that's also it for Prosperity. First edition. It certainly wasn't called First Edition when I started this expansion. This took a while, just longer gaps between videos. There's just a lot going on. Yeah, and a lot in Dominion as well, with all these second editions, and a third one coming out soon as well. So what am I going to do next? Well, I sure would like to do videos on these new cards, and actually get Seaside second edition and Prosperity second edition out there, and not leave them in a first edition state. But the reality is I need a bit more time to play with some of these cards and understand how good they are, right? Like, they are new. I really want my videos to be like quite comprehensive, and so I don't want them filled with hot takes. So, also, now that I have videos on removed cards, what I might do, almost as like stalling for time, I will probably do videos, like just 2 videos, one with like all the base removed cards, just for fun, right? You know, I wasn't going to do the removed cards, but I might as well, but I'll pile them all into one video. You know, there won't be random kingdom analysis because they're not on this client. I'll do that for the base cards and the intrigue cards, and then we'll see where we go from there. At some point, Hinterland's 2nd edition will come out, and then maybe I'll move on to that one first, or maybe just Cornucopia. I think that was next in release order. Maybe I should do that. But I do want to do these videos on these new cards. I just need to make sure I've got it all sorted in my mind first. So, yeah, well, thank you for watching. These expansions aren't done quite yet, it seems, and I'm sure whatever I choose to do next, hopefully I'll see you there. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.